First of all, I'd like to welcome you all here today, and I thank you for your patience. We have, I think, set a record. We actually packed the room, which is what I just said on Facebook today. I want to pack the room, and we have definitely done that. First thing I want to do, we have a deal with the Frenchman's Widow restaurant here in Herrin. They have agreed to feed Mr. Birger and his lovely bride, as he refers to her, in exchange for a photo op at the restaurant. And we are all invited to come to the restaurant. We're not going to eat free, only Charlie and his wife are. But they would like a head count. So if you're going to join us at the Frenchman's Widow, I need for you to please raise your hand.
What time?
As soon as the presentation's over, they will drive Charlie over in the car. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 15, and I'm sure Phil, 16, 17. Okay, I'll send them a message and tell them about 20 or 25. When you get to the Widow, there is a parking lot that they have purchased. It's just across the street from the Widow at 16th and Monroe. It's next to the Hollywood Tavern. Also, there was a donation jar that you probably noticed when you signed in. If you didn't notice, I'm going to pass the hat, and unfortunately I didn't have the right hat, but it's a pirate's hat, so it's close. Normally we do not do this, but Mr. Birger requested that a donation be made in his name to the Franklin County Preservation Society, and we are intending to honor that. If you can help out, great. If you can't, that's fine too. So I'm going to start passing the hat, and we'll go from there. I would like to thank Ed and Pat Key, who have been friends of mine and my family for years and years and years. And I spoke with Ed and said, hey, do you have an old car that Charlie could be driven in? And he said, I have a 1926 Hupmobile. And I said, well, is that an old car like Charlie? But Charlie said he wanted one that was one that he would have considered stealing in the late 20s. So we were able to provide that thanks to Ed and Pat. Thank the Frenchman's Widow for their support, and the Herrin Area Historical Society and the Friends of the Herrin City Library. This presentation is a joint effort between the History Room here at the library, the Friends, and the Historical Society. Also, if someone can hand me the clipboard where we all signed in. Somebody hand it to me. Yes. If you didn't sign in, because we like to brag about how many people we had at presentations, but if you did not sign in, please do so. You did? Okay, you can just start passing it. Okay, and I think that's everything. The presentation is being filmed, and it will be available for checkout through the library system. If you have friends that don't live in Herrin, you can tell them to request this DVD through their library, and it will be loaned to them. And now, I would like to thank Mr. Ray. He is the president of the Historical Society in Franklin County, and he is bringing Charlie Birger back to us today. Before he steps up, I just want to say that I don't know nearly enough about Charlie Birger, and I'm prepared to learn a lot today. But I do know that he was a man of contradictions. He was a soldier, a cowboy, a miner, a saloon keeper, a gangster, Robin Hood. He was a businessman, a crook, a bootlegger, and a murderer. He was anti-Klan, which always gets points in my book. And after a partnership with the Shelton gang soured, he aligned against them in a gang war. He was mysterious and no one really knew him. And the legend of Charlie Birger lives on and will continue to do so. So here today, we have Mr. Charlie Birger.
Well, I'd like to thank Miss Lisa Carnegie. That's a good name for a library lady. I'd like to thank the Herrin Area Historical Society, as well as the Friends of the Herrin Library. And this is a historical moment that I look forward to come back after 87 years and set the record straight with you folks here in Herrin. And I have plenty to say. But you know, I find it interesting that Mr. Gary DeNeal, after 10 years of research, has written what is believed to be the authoritative book about my life. And I appreciate that. The book is called Night of Another Sort. It was published in 1981. But it would be tragic, if not comic, that within his introduction, he says about me, the summary of my life, he says, while a small stone in a Jewish cemetery bearing my given Russian name, Chestnut Isnik Birger, may mean nothing to a passerby over the St. Louis area. The far across the river, over here in southern Illinois, particularly in the counties of Williamson, Franklin, and Saline, the name Charlie Birger is as close to a legend as there ever is. While smarter and better men have made good, only to be forgotten by the grandchildren's generation, Mr. DeNeal says that this gangster will be remembered for a long time to come. And he says, now you can blame this on his good looks, or his charm, or his violent nature, but then says that you folks should save some blame for yourselves, but despite your protest, you cherish your misfits, seeing them as a mirror image of yourselves that you dare not reveal. So I'm here to tell you, and you should know from living in Herrin, that that is absolutely not the case. Because the last time that I stood before you folks in Herrin was on a historic day, a turning period for us in southern Illinois. And that day was April the 13th, 1926, to be known as the riot on the lawn of the Masonic Temple. And on that day, the Ku Klux Klan had taken over the polling place down here on the 14th Street in Harrison at the Masonic Temple. And they had harassed, they'd already taken over the township and the school board elections in previous days. And they had, through intimidation, driven off a nun who had lived in Herrin for 2 decades. So I came before you and convinced you that I was armed to the teeth, and my men, along with the Sheltons behind me, could overtake that polling place and put an end to the Ku Klux Klan here in southern Illinois for good. Now, there are 2 things that the Ku Klux Klan didn't like. One of them was a Russian immigrant Jew with a machine gun in a gang. And the other one was Herrin's Italian, Catholic, working class coal miners who they said had habituated to wine. So by the end of that day, by the loss of 3 of my men and a total of 6 casualties, we eliminated the Ku Klux Klan. I want to tell you the important point, because a lot of you are historians, you always wonder after that point, what caused the falling out between myself and the Sheltons. Remember I said that the Sheltons were behind me? Well, it's just that they were so far behind me you couldn't see them back there. We fought vigorously, and I think they actually threw us into the fray. Well, there's another event that I want to tell you about while we're on this subject, and that was 15 months prior to that date. And this was at another historic spot. It was in the within the lobby of the European Hotel. It was the Canary Cigar Store. And that was the killing of S. Glenn Young. And everybody has their theories as to what happened. And we know, of course, that the coroner's report was inconclusive. However, Sheriff Callaghan had a good report of what happened that day. And people always knew that I had been spotted in Herrin before that happened. And I'm going to tell you folks for the first time what happened that day. Okay, well, S. Glenn Young was that little bandy-legged rooster of a man that was hired by the Ku Klux Klan. Ku Klux Klan was formed in 1923, followed after what they called the lawlessness of the W.J. Lester mine incident, which you all know about. So they hired S. Glenn Young, and he was claimed to be a lawman, but he went around with these two pearl-handled Colt 45 1911s, automatics, some World War I Army fatigues, a doughboy hat, and had overplayed his credentials. But the people who actually formed the Ku Klux Klan, that was an organization consisting of two Williamson County board members and a Methodist preacher. And it was by the name of the Williamson Law Enforcement League. So, AKA the Ku Klux Klan. So, there were several raids taking place by S. Glenn Young. He had actually taken these Colt 45s by pistol whipping a person over in Jackson County. And it was discovered later that he was actually one of the guards at the during the Lester Mine incident. And he held a great animosity toward the minorities, those who had come here to work in coal mines. So we know the facts are that I was seen here in Herrin before that incident occurred, and we know that there was a distraction. Now, Orr Thomas was a county deputy, but he was also from Herrin, and he formed an organization called the Knights of the Flaming Circle, which was an anti-Klan group. And he had made the statement that the next time he saw S. Glenn Young, one of them would die. So within the Canary cigar store, there was a young fellow who S. Glenn Young had hated, and we created a distraction. S. Glenn Young walked by, looked in and saw this fellow, and went in and started cursing him because of his accusations that he was a supporter of the J.W. Lester mine. And at that particular time, S. Glenn Young, of course, came walking by, and as soon as he walked into the Canary cigar store, S. Glenn Young was standing there with two of his bodyguards. Well, the last word that S. Glenn Young spoke was, "Don't pull that gun, Orr." Then, as we know, there were 4 fatalities, and the story would be, according to the coroner's report, that S. Glenn Young shot Orr Thomas, and Orr Thomas shot S. Glenn Young. But Sheriff Callahan had a comprehensive report, which the coroner's jury, which was strictly Klansmen, did not accept. And within that report, it said that S. Glenn Young drew both of his pearl-handle revolvers, and doing a count of every available cartridge, he only got off 2 rounds, and both of those were in the ceiling. So one would have to think that Orr Thomas killed 2 bodyguards and S. Glenn Young, and it's always been said that we were in the shadows, and I'm not going to sign a confession at this point, but you can draw your own conclusions. But after being called a misfit, the things that I did here in Southern Illinois always made national news. And before Al Capone's fame in his day, always made the top fold throughout the country. And there was a reporter by the name of W.A.S. Douglas. Now, he was a reporter with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and he also was a writer and a columnist for the U.S. Mercury magazine. So he came down, after this event, he came down to Southern Illinois to catch up with me. And by the way, in turn for saving the day, for doing this courageous act of eliminating the Ku Klux Klan, I simply asked that Herrin allow me to maintain my roadhouses and my slot machines within this town. So, the U.S. Mercury was printed in this series of essays by W.A.S. Douglas, and it read as follows, and this was his description after he came in deep into a roadhouse in Southern Illinois, met and interviewed me. And I quote, "Well, there he stood on the sanded floor, a middle-sized, wiry man in his late 40s, but not looking a day over 30. He was dressed, as always, in a soft brown jacket and leather riding breeches. Now, the latter was made by one of Chicago's finest tailors and was a tribute to both the cutter and to the wearer. A leather hunting cap was perched on top of his thick black hair. Brightly polished yellow boots and jangling, gleaming spurs completed his romantic makeup." Then he went on to say, "Upon examination of Mr. Birger's military records, one can only conclude that without the distractions of prohibition, Mr. Birger would have gone on to be one of the greatest military men that our nation has ever produced. So tie that in to being a misfit. And I can tell a lot of you, I hear I'm trying to win you over, you're not buying into so fast, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, Charlie, we know all about you, we know all about that little necktie party they had for you. Well, let me tell you about that little necktie party. I was hanged for the killing of Mayor Joe Adams. Well, he was supposedly the mayor of West City. They called him Fat Joe. He was an affiliate of Shelton Gang. He housed the Shelton's armored car within his garage there in West City. And the entire dispute, the gang wars, had caused the Sheltons to not allow our gang to go anywhere west of West City. That was the line which we were not allowed to. There were a lot of things going on. In fact, over at the Ziegler mine, they had 42 drinking establishments alone. And once a week, they would go to St. Louis and bring a carload of ladies in on payday. And I wasn't even allowed to go to that side of the county. So the point is, you might say that I was hanged. I did not kill Joe Adams. I killed lots of men, as I said on the day of the hanging, but never a good one. And two boys by the name of Thomases wanted to be in my gang and took it upon their own to go out and kill this Joe Adams. They knocked on the front door, gave his wife a note, lured him to the front door, and they shot him and they killed him. So I was hanged because I was an accomplice to the killing of a man because of a dispute over alcohol sales and revenue from slot machines. Now, folks, I find this ironic that I'm reading the paper back there before I came in, and I found out that the state of Illinois is in such a financial shape that the only way that they can dig their way out of financial debt is from the profit of alcohol and slot machines. Right here in Herrin, Illinois, the last accounting from last month, there were 69 slot machines alone in this county. Last month, the last accounting month, which was May, $2.17 million played in electronic video slot machines here in Herrin, Illinois alone, with 40,000 going to the state of Illinois and 8,500 going to the city of Herrin. And it's projected by the end of this year, after this video gaming system is in place, the state of Illinois will have taken in $12 billion played with a profit of approximately $0.5 billion to be divided between the state and the city governments. Now, folks, it seems to me that the state of Illinois prosecuted and they hanged me, and they took over all of my operations. If anybody wants to collect money and put a statue next to the no-go over here. But other than freeing the Southern Illinois, the Ku Klux Klan, and coming up with this idea. But I want to tell you that actually I did live in the best of times here in Southern Illinois. And for someone to understand what we did together, the times that we went through, I think I'm going to have to stand over here for a while and tell you about those times. And then I'm going to come back and tell you about my life. Well, Southern Illinois, of course, has a unique and a rich history, but we were one of the first territories settled actually here in the central part of the United States. And most of us are descendants of second or third Irish or Scottish immigrants who came in prior to, everybody shaking their head, prior to 1790. Most of our ancestors are people who came here, not me, because I'm a Russian Jew, but they came in through the Carolinas and through Virginia. Then they settled in the South. Then perhaps after the Revolutionary War, they came up, they were homesteaders, and mostly pioneer merchants and subsistent farmers. And not much was going on here in Southern Illinois. And most of us, to give you an idea of the cultural differences, at the outbreak of the Civil War, 1861, we naturally had tendencies and leaned toward the South, because all of our ancestors came up from the South and we had Southern tendencies. Unlike the people just to our north who came in the next wave of immigration, they came in through Ellis Island There were a lot of Western Europeans and people who just didn't think like the people here in Southern Illinois. So nothing was really going on until following the Civil War in 1869, Laban Carter sank the first coal mine in Williamson County. And it was located 1/2 mile east of the town that is now in his legacy. But the coal mine was only 60 feet deep. It was on 120 acres of land. And the first year, it only mined 121,000 tons of coal, which isn't very much. You see, back then, and throughout the first part of the 1900s, coal was just used for heat. And in the winter, most of the mines would go idle. Most of the miners would work as farmers. And then if they had a union strike, didn't matter, they would just go over during the summer and they'd work that out. But then, and so by 1900, here in Herrin, things were pretty well. In fact, in Herrin, the records would show that you had 34 operating coal mines. But these were just small hillside, farm-side, drift mines or slope mines. There were a couple of mines about the size of Laban Carter's. The coal could only be mined, and you could only take core samples of a depth up to 500 feet. And there were only 2 coal mines going on in Franklin County at that time. Well, anyway, your town had really prospered over here in Herrin, and the Peabody Coal Company had built the Coal Belt Electric Railway. And it was a trolley car system that would take coal miners out to the Carterville site and have a Y to the Carterville mine, went down through Energy, and it went out to Crenshaw Crossing and some of those coal mines. So Herrin was a booming, prosperous place until about the same time in the early 1900s, a fellow by the name of Captain William Holliday came to Southern Illinois, and he had the money and he had the mechanism to drill for coal below 500 feet. So in Franklin County, he discovered the richest seam of coal in the world at a depth of 500 to 600 feet that was 6 to 12 feet deep. And Southern Illinois became a boom town. We were known throughout the world for finding this reserve. And at the same time, this gearing up to 1900, from the time, or 1910, this was the time that Henry Ford began his process of building a total of 15 million automobiles from 1908 through 1927. And this was the time the world was gearing up for World War I. And instead of using coal just for heat, it was used for the generation of electricity. So this was an area that was just right for cultural diversion, because people came over from Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, such as myself, the Hungarians, the Polish, the Russians, and some Western Europeans, such as the Italians, specifically to work in the coal mines. The U.S. Census Bureau will tell you that in Williamson County, in 1910, the population was 45,000. And by 1920, the population had risen to 61,500. And it was in 1960, the population had dropped back down to 45,000, and it wasn't until the 2010 census that this county got back up to its 1920 level. Franklin County was reported as the only county west of the Mississippi River that actually, or east of the Mississippi River, that doubled in population, and it went from 26,000 to 57,000. 65% of the population living here between the two counties, and Williamson was a part of Franklin County until 1839, by the way, but 65% of the population consisted of immigrant coal miners. And there were 3 types of people who lived here in this county at that time. We had the original people who came in, who were 2nd and 3rd generation of the original people. Then you had a class of people called the Kentucky Crackers. And I think they called them that because of the cracking of their black powder rifles. And they're the people who kind of drank moonshine and sat off to the edge of town and left the status quo alone. And then you had the dreadful immigrants who came in here, mostly a lot of single men who were hardworking and making money. And what the status quo really didn't like was the fact that they were taking the jobs away, the newcomers were taking the jobs away from the status quo. So that was the reason for the formation of the Klan, the real reason, in 1923, following the Lester mine disaster. Well, so now that we have established the history and the heritage of this area, I want to tell you about my story. Okay. I was born in Kobo, Russia in 1880. Well, actually, my military records would show 1880, but that tombstone over in the Jewish cemetery in St. Louis would show 1883. And my brother, older brother Sam, came over. He was going to avoid the Russian army. He was 17 years old and saved money, worked in New York, came in, by the way, I came in through Ellis Island just when they were completing the Statue of Liberty, sent for the rest of the family in 1907. So after all of us got together in New York, we moved on to St. Louis, where I grew up in the Post-Dispatch Alley, folding and delivering newspapers and dealing with the local toughs in St. Louis, where I learned how to fight and learned how to be street smart. So I stayed around St. Louis, and I got to meet, I did some errands for some gangsters, and I had quite a reputation for being tough and taking care of myself. But I always had the dream of joining, even when I was a boy, coming over the Wild West, the American Wild West. So I joined the U.S. 13th Cavalry and was stationed in Fort Sisseton, Wyoming, and bivouacked through the Yellowstone Park, the Grand Tetons. But my military record will show you that I became an expert marksman, and I was a boxer, and my main notoriety was breaking a bronco by the name of Maneater. I won a $12.50 bet. My military record shows that I have a flattened thumb for slugging this horse in the face. But I had a patented way when I won that $12.50 that I had learned, and that was when that bronco started bucking, I had a bottle full of salt water in the back of my coat, and I busted that bottle over the horse's head. When that salt water came around his mouth, he got the taste of what he thought was blood, and he would slow down. So I had quite a reputation, as W.A.S. Douglas had noted, for my military record and my success in the military. So I stayed in the military for 6 years, then I came back to St. Louis, and I decided to go over to some prosperity was going on in the Staunton or the Glen Carbon area. So I slept in the back of a candy store in Glen Carbon. I would go to a place called Trubone Saloon over in Staunton, and I played cards. Then I had a job racking balls at a pool hall, and I just basically made money from gambling and from whatever I could come up with. And that's when I committed my first murder. There was a local tough over there by the name of Chubby Houghton. And Chubby Houghton had said that he was going to kill me over some gambling receipts. And that's when I devised a system that I used throughout my life in getting an alibi by the person who I antagonized so mad that they would make a threat against my life. Then, after that person would be killed, then I would have the alibi that he had antagonized, that had threatened me. So I was there, and I knew Chubby was coming after me, and I had a knife under my shirt. When Chubby came in the back of that candy store, I killed him and made a reputation then, but thought that I should move on out of that Staunton area. So then I came actually to Christopher, Illinois for a while as a coal miner, but I always heard that this was before Prohibition. So there was a little mining town by the name of Ledford, which consisted mostly of Russian immigrants such as myself. And that was just southwest of Harrisburg. But the allurement of Saline County at that time was that it was dry. So I moved to Ledford, and I started a general store. And I had the only automobile in that town, and I had the only telephone in that town, and I had a grocery store. And in that grocery store, I provided all kinds, if somebody needed a ride to town, very few people could even speak English, I'd give them a ride to the hospital in Harrisburg. Or they wanted to use my telephone, I'd let them do that. And I had alcohol, anything that anybody wanted. In fact, I even ran a babysitting service during the day for some of the coal miners. And out in front, it was just a cinder street. It was known for having fights, and not these friendly bouts, but the kind, the fist-to-nose type of fights where they'd find blood and bits of teeth out in the road every morning. But life went on. I was arrested for being part of a car theft ring. Got involved with some people out of Marion. I spent some time in jail for the theft of a Buick back in 1913. But luck would change in 1919. this is the best, beginning of the period of time that I was talking about. That period, 1919, from the enactment of Prohibition and the ending of the Great World War, all the way through the Great Depression in 1929. So I was in Harrisburg one day, and I was just that boy who had a reputation. I'd killed there was another tavern operator who tried to come into my territory by a fellow by the name of Chink Schaefer, and I assisted the police in apprehending him one night. He accidentally was killed, and I was exonerated for that. So I was known in Harrisburg as kind of a little rough foreign boy and didn't gain much respect until 1919, when the rest of the county and the rest of southern Illinois, in fact the entire United States, went dry. But my luck really changed one summer, 1919, when I went into the Busy Bee ice cream parlor just off the square in Harrisburg. And I was sitting there at a table, and I looked up at the bar, at the counter, and there was a young girl sitting there, and she was the prettiest girl that I'd ever seen. And her name was Bee Bainbridge, and she had this straw hat on, and this dark navy blue ribbon, and she was sitting up at the bar, and I went up to her, and I said, "Young lady," I said, "you're the prettiest girl that I've ever seen. Someday I want you to be my wife. By the way, I'm a jewelry salesman out of St. Louis." So, Bee was a beautiful girl. The only problem was, I was 36 years old, and she was 16. So I was 20 years her senior. But I arranged that night for me to meet her over by the Horace Mann School. We would drive around and discuss things. So we did that. The only problem was that her little brother saw her get in the car with me and drive around. Well, later that evening, just after sunset, I let Bee off at Horace Mann School, and her mother, Mary Bainbridge, was standing behind a tree. Now, Bee's father was a respected mine inspector and didn't think much of me at all, but he tolerated it. But Bee's mother couldn't stand me, and she had heard that her daughter was driving around with this gangster, Charlie Brogan. So she was standing behind that tree. She had a switch, and she grabbed Bee by the back of the neck and whipped her for 2.5 blocks all the way home on the back of the legs. But what she didn't know is the next day, this was during the county fair, I'd agreed to meet Bee. We were going to go for a drive. So the next night, Bee snuck out of the house and met me at the county fair, and I said, "We're going to St. Louis." So I drove her all the way to Clayton, Missouri, where my sister Rachel Shamsky lived. And when we got over there, I went to Justice of the Peace at the St. Louis courthouse and told her to sign a paper. We're officially married. And I took her over to my sister Rachel Shamsky's house. Now, Rachel didn't think much of her. And it wasn't because she had on that little homemade dress that was all worn out. It wasn't because she had this thick Southern Illinois accent. It wasn't because she had all those welt marks all over her legs. It was because I was supposed to marry a respectable Jew and not a Gentile. So I took Bee back home to Southern Illinois, made peace with her family, and lived in the garage behind her house. But it's at that time of Prohibition that I got to know most respectable people in Harrisburg. And I knew C.V. Parker. I knew a fellow by the name of H.B. Rathbone, who owned the Rathbone and Brown clothier store. Milo Pruitt, who owned a Buick dealership. So I was the man about town. Everybody wanted me and the illegal alcohol that I could bring them during the 1920s. So I had a roadhouse there in Harrisburg, and also built my first roadhouse here in Williamson County. Now that is between Johnson City and Marion. It's called Halfway House, and it was on the west side of the road. So everything was fine, and I had shocked to learn the news of the Lester mine strike. That actually eclipsed anything that I'd ever experienced. And we had a 1923, as I said, S. Glenn Young formed the Ku Klux Klan. And when he did that, he conducted a series of raids. One of them was in Benton. He took a train all the way to Benton, and he had several dozen agents go round up 150 bootleggers parade them around the square and berate them, take them over here and place them in jail. Then he had a mock trial in Danville where S. Glenn Young sent some of his relatives, actually, recruited some men, and they would go to the taverns and the roadhouses here in Southern Illinois, and they would claim that they saw certain people buying drinks and alcohol. So they went to Danville and made convictions and placed some of my men in jail. In fact, I spent a year there at that time, and when I came back, B had left. B had left Southern Illinois and had gone off to some undisclosed place with a relative in the Northeast. So I found myself all alone until 1925 when I made a partnership. I told you the story about the Ku Klux Klan and the elimination of the Klan in the January 24th, 1925, and then eliminated it completely in 1926 here at the Election Day riot. So we had partnered with the Shelton gang, and we had complete control of Southern Illinois, and we formed our hideout by the name of Shady Rest. And Shady Rest is simply a roadhouse. It was a constructed log cabin that was halfway between Harrisburg and Marion. And there we had bulldog fights, rooster fights. We had our own electric generator. We had anything that anyone would want to buy, and we were respected. And we had almost all of the law enforcement paid off, almost every sheriff in every town, except perhaps Sheriff Pritchard over in Benton. And things went well, actually, until that time in 1925. We actually had a rum running ring where we could get Jamaican rum, unlike anyone else in the territory, and it came out of schooners in Florida. We'd come up through Shawneetown through a series of paid-off law enforcement people in the South, and then we made a split, and it would go across from Shawneetown over to St. Louis and supply alcohol in St. Louis as Jamaican rum. And then it actually had a route that went to Chicago and supplied Al Capone. So we had everything that we needed. We had the law enforcement paid off. There was plenty of money, but the animosity started. And with our common enemy, the Ku Klux Klan, out of the way, the gang war of 1926 started. And you've probably seen some of the first things, but we had each gang built an armored car. I had a 1913 Buick that was built with armament, and the Sheltons had an armored tank that was actually an oil tanker that was placed on a 2-ton Model T truck. And we had many encounters. We had the first aerial bombing over U.S. territory happened in 1926 during the gang wars, when the Sheltons hired a World War I pilot to take up a Jenny biplane and drop bundles of dynamite wrapped in nitroglycerin from the plane into Shady Rest. And they were all a dud except for one. But I had a lieutenant by the name of Art Newman, and he kept check over all of the people in my gang, and he was a very trusted person. And we also had a fellow by the name, he was a war hero, by the name of Glory Price. And he was a real tall state policeman, and he joined our gang, and became a head of a huge car theft ring. And I was talking about, and Arlie Boswell was the state's attorney here in Williamson County, and he was the one who failed to prosecute after the Herrin, the incident with the killing of S. Glenn Young. But right after that, as a piece of evidence, he became a member of our gang. He was helping us with paying off the law enforcement, helping us with our operations. So we thought that things were pretty bad, except the fact that fact that I could not cross over the boundaries, and because of the fact that the Sheltons were making it impossible for me to continue my operations. So that is when 2 teenage boys came. They were the Thomasons from West Frankfort, Illinois. They wanted to be a part of my gang, and they took it on their own, of course, with my coaxing, to go to the house of Mr. Joe Adams in West City and kill him. Well, all would be fine, and this pretty much kept quiet until the fact I talked about the reporter, this W.A.S. Douglas from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. There was another reporter by the name of John T. Rogers. Everything was pretty much put to sleep. Nothing was going to happen. I mean, I'd killed 6 men at this time and not spent a day in jail. Then all of a sudden, here's, as an accomplice to a murder, I'm going to be implicated for the killing of, or killing Joe Adams. I'm supposed to be supposedly facing a death sentence. Well, at that point, this John T. Rogers came, and my Lieutenant Art Newman had taken the train all the way to California. And John T. Rogers went and got the sheriff of Franklin County, Sheriff Pritchard, and drove all the way out to California, tracked him down, and on the way back, John Rogers had a signed confession that they gave to the state's attorney in Franklin County. Well, we also had heard that this state policeman, Lori Price, who I trusted, had talked to the police to try to save his own neck. So in January 1927, on a snowy winter night, we clipped his phone lines. And we went in, and Art Newman took Mrs. Lori Price, she was a school teacher, and took her off, and they killed her, and they put her in an abandoned coal mine shaft. And her husband, Lori Price, was taken out to Du Bois in a car that I was riding in, and some of my men shot him. They found him out in a cornfield after the snow had thawed. Well, people in Southern Illinois were fed up, and they said, you know, it's all right if you're gangsters and you want to kill each other, but this time you've just gone a little bit too far. And I had heard that, in fact, the sheriff of Saline County called me, and he said, I hate to tell you this, Mr. Birger, but we have a warrant for your arrest, and we think that we can clear this matter up just in a bit of time if you'll come in. So I said, not a problem, I'll come in. Well, I did not know that they had that signed confession from John T. Rogers that had been presented to the state's attorney. And I agreed to stay overnight in the Saline County Jail. They would allow me to keep my machine gun, which they did. Because I convinced them that I would be overtaken. I didn't think they had enough security. I was afraid they'd overtake the guards, come in, and they'd take me out and kill me. So then, the next day, Sheriff Pritchard came and got me and took me over to Benton, and I went to court for an arraignment. But in 1927, the means of execution wasn't even hanging, it was the electric chair. No one had ever been hanged in Franklin County. So I thought it was going to be a problem. I got out of everything else. But a warrant was made for my arrest, and then I was sad to find that the Thomasons had signed a confession for my implication in the murder of Joe Adams. But having the money that I had, I hired 3 of the best attorneys, and for effect, I brought my first, I had 2 daughters. I had Bernice, who was the daughter, Charlene, who was the daughter of my first wife, Edna, who I brought over from Clayton, Missouri. She was the statuesque blonde. She left after a few years. And then Dee Bainbridge was the mother of Minnie Birger, my other daughter. Now, how would you like to be named Minnie Birger? My attorneys told me for a fact that we would bring Minnie and Charlene in for this year-long grueling trial. And then my housekeeper's daughter, Bernice, came for the effect of being the caretaker of the mother and somewhat of a wife to me. So it was the hottest of times during the summer during that trial of 1927. And the verdict came down that I was to be hanged in October, but by stay of motions, I postponed it until the 13th of April of 1928. So my attorneys told me that the only chance that I had to remain alive or postpone this execution for a period of time was for a sanity hearing. So I went, this paid national attention, by the way. The courtyard there in Franklin County was packed every day for this event. And I went in to see the judge for my sanity hearing. I had to prove to him that I was insane and not fit to be hanged, which I didn't really want to go along with what my attorneys were advising me. So the judge said, well, Mr. Birger, what do you have to say for yourself? and it was a crowd of about 5 times what I'm looking at here, and you could hear a pin drop. And I said, well, Your Honor, I'm hanged. Did they do hang me? I only asked that I be buried in a Catholic cemetery. So the judge says, well, why would that be, Mr. Birger? This is on the court's transcript. I said, because that's the last place the devil would come looking for a Jew. Just you're roaring and laughing. They took me back to jail and decided that I wasn't insane. But I was treated as royalty. I was in a side pocket cell. I could walk up and down another open door up in front of my cell, and I could look out while they were building my gallows. And I was treated by the people of Herrin, the Italian working class, coal mining class. I was a hero. I was a protector. So people would come and bring special food for me, and I was interviewed. I was treated as royalty. But the day before my hanging, I'd lost a lot of weight. And the morning, my hanging was postponed to the 19th day of April, 1928. The night before that, a big storm had gone through, and the ambulance that was supposed to come and take my body away wasn't there because it had gone out in an emergency and there were trees blown down. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind of day that you could just live for. The air was fresh, flowers were blooming, the grass was green, and white fluffy clouds were blowing overhead. I looked out and there was a crowd, an exodus of 5,000. The stockade fence had been built because they feared that someone from the gang or someone would come and shoot or try to get me out, but I don't think they could have found a parking place that day. But I was pacing the floor, and Arlie Boswell, who I hold no charm for, because Arlie Boswell, the state's attorney of Williamson County, was the one who helped form the Klan, and then after the demise of the Klan, came on my payroll, and then went along with the prosecution of me. So he was sent up to assist in my hanging along with Sheriff Pritchard in Benton. So they came up, and I'd been pacing this hallway, looking out the window at the gallows and the crowd assembling. And Arlie said, well, how are you doing today, Charlie? And I said, well, how in GDH would you feel if you just had 1 hour to live? So they offered, and I accepted, a shot of morphine. Now, the hospital was on the 6th floor of the big, tall building in the middle of the Benton Square. So a Nurse Woolard came over in her white nurse's uniform and a white towel with a syringe of morphine, which I accepted. And that changed my demeanor immediately. And I put on a blue serge suit. Well, the hangman was a Mr. Phil Hanna. He was out of White County. And you could write a book about Phil Hanna, who had a much more interesting life than I had, because when he was a little boy, he attended a hanging with his father, and it took the victim 45 minutes to die. So he vowed when he grew up that he was going to be the humane hangman. And he was a bit eccentric, and their family had money, and he would travel around. He had a portable gallows that he took on a train. He had the gallows that our county had to borrow from Jackson County, which were built for hanging a person in 1915 and used in several hangings. He would borrow those. He had several ropes. He had a special means of waxing these ropes with beeswax. And he had a special knot that he would tie up to the side, and it was loosed at a certain amount. Then he would weigh his victims before the hanging. Well, in my case, I had lost weight, and he ordered that a hole be dug underneath the gallows. So there was this big mound of dirt, and there was a wicker basket sitting on it. So I stepped out of my cell, my blue serge suit, walked down to the basement of the jail with the sheriff, Arlie Boswell, and I caught up with Phil Hanna and walked up and saw the basket, and one reporter said that I spat upon it, and I did. Then I walked up on the gallows. I shook hands with Phil Hanna, and I said, "You're a good old boy, and if I have to be hanged, I'm glad you're doing it." Because I don't think anyone would want somebody to say, "This is my first day on the job, bear with me." And I shook hands with the sheriff. He asked me if I had anything to say, and I said, "No, I've forgiven everyone." And then, before that time, word had gotten to me. Phil Hanna had asked me if I wanted the Black Death or the White Death. And I said, Of course, I want the black one. I don't want to look like a plexer. So before he placed the black death hood on me, I looked at it and addressed the crowd of 5,000 plus, and I spoke the words that have gone down in infamy. It is a beautiful world. Next day, the newspaper, the Benton Evening News read, "Birger dies smiling." Well, I'll tell you about my friend, H.B. Rathbone. He was partner of Rathbone and Brown Clothier there in Harrisburg. I told you that I killed a fellow by the name of Cecil Knighton. He was a natty little Alabamian who came up and wanted to gamble. He got a little bit too smart. Actually, I let him come to our house. He was that close to us. So I killed Cecil Knighton. Well, Mr. Rathbone is Rathbone and Brown Clothing Store. I was walking down the street one day and he said, "Come in here, Charlie, I have something to show you." Well, it seems that Cecil Knighton had ordered half a dozen silk shirts before he was killed that had C monogrammed on the pockets. And I was delighted, and I bought the entire box. But anyway, H.B. Rathbone was also a writer for the Harrisburg Daily Register. And I'm going to tell you what the Harrisburg Daily Register said after my hanging. And I quote, "As we stood in front of the rough, bare, and unpainted scaffold, a tragic symbol of its own purpose, I remember the first time that I talked with Birger. It was at his house while discussing business of the day, and I made mention of a large stein that sat on the mantel above the fireplace. Now, this was a kind of a stein that would adorn the most pretentious saloons of the time. So taking it down, he handed it to me, and we entered into a long discussion about its beauty, and its worth. Now, on its sides, pointed in gorgeous colors, were Arthur and Guinevere. And while knowing nothing of the great Arthurian knighthood, the bold colors and the tiny silver knight surmounting the lid with sword and shield in brave attitude appealed to Birger's sense of duty and of worth. And then went on to say, a vain and ignorant boy who never grew up, caring nothing about money but the excitement of earning it, jacketed in a steel vest and surrounded by enemies of his own making, commanding respect and gaining adulation from the mob the only way that he knew how, a knight of another sort." Well, that is the naming of the book, A Knight of Another Sort. So I'm telling you, I died smiling, and I think that I perhaps knew, and I told you that one of the comments that I made when I resolved the fact that my death was imminent was that I have done a lot of good things, and I've done a lot of bad things. And the least of which would be freeing you folks from the Ku Klux Klan here in Southern Illinois once and for all. And we did make history together, and I want to tell you, while I have the opportunity to have you, as fellow historians and people who are interested in history, that people are interested in cultural heritage. And we have a jail museum where I was hanged over in Benton. We have 3,000 visitors there yearly, and people who don't even care about history are interested in this history. Because the Birger story, I am called what is an enigma, an unanswerable question. So that is the beauty of the story of Charlie Birger, and that is just the town where I was hanged. Southern Illinois, over here in Williamson County, people say, well, Marion is the hub of the universe, and Herrin is just a flower box, bedroom community, nothing happened over here. And you were sitting right in the midst, in my opinion, the most historic district in Southern Illinois. While it might not be ripe for the picking right now, the time will come when that Masonic Lodge should be preserved, and the people who travel, you have lots of hotels, lots of shopping malls, the people who travel and go to destination visits are looking for cultural heritage and answering these questions. What happened? What was this big cultural experiment when population doubled, immigrants came over, and coal mining unions, all of these things happened to shape our country. Then I wanted to, just at the wrong time here, I was going to say something about this gentleman here.
It's your cue to start.
We've really been I'd like to step out of this narrative for a while. A lot has gone on here in the past year, and Amy Erickson is not here. She's with SI Treasure Tools. And there's another organization called the Southern Illinois Association of Museums. And we've had several meetings. We had the spring meeting at one of our museums there in Benton. So I've become involved with our museum as part of the Two Wars of Southern Illinois tour. I'm sure most of you have been on the Herrin Massacre and through SI Treasure Tours. So what I'm saying is this has already started. There are people, those Herrin Massacre tours are selling out, and we have group members from our Franklin County Historic Preservation Society here. We've worked for 20 years, and we know the power of the Birger story of the 1920s, of this era, of S. Glenn Young, of all the things that I've talked about now. John Turpinetz has just stepped out the one time that I need him. But what we're going to do here is there is on the 25th, there is a Two Wars tour that is a 6-hour tour, and it goes from, starts at the Williamson County Jail and includes lunch, and it ends up at our museum in the afternoon. There, I can show you in our armory room, Birger's actual Thompson 21 machine guns. I can show you Pearl Hammond Colt 45 that S. Glenn Young had in his hand when he was shot. It showed you the cell where I stayed for the better part of the year before being hanged. And that's just one stop on the tour. So Amy Erickson, who works with John Turpinetz, has asked that we give away one ticket. It's a $45 ticket. And I need to ask a question. It's going to be a tough question. But whoever can answer this question gets this one ticket. John's not here for this great event. I waited the whole time here to be here. And can someone please tell me the sheriff of Williamson County, killing of S. Glenn Young?
Or Thomas.
No, the sheriff.
Was it Hagel?
No,
Gallagher?
that's close enough. Yeah. Okay. Okay, folks, you've been very nice. I appreciate it.